Okay, great. Welcome everybody. Today's panel is one I'm quite excited about. We have some guests from the UK. This is going to be a conversation with some script supervisors that sort of like connected with sort of quite recently when I sort of attended one of their Zoom meetings. And then they were very generous to sort of like chat with me and answer some of my sort of curiosities about the industry in the UK. So I've managed to rope a bunch of them to talk to us more about that, which I think is just going to be very interesting to sort of hear about their perspective. So let me just do a very quick intro so everyone can say hi. We have with us Sarah Hayward, who has worked on shows like Vanity Fair for Amazon, The Night Manager, Churchill Secret. Sarah, do you want to say hello?
Hello. Hi.
We also have Jane Houston, who's worked on Giri, Haji, Netflix show. Also a lot of work with Phoebe Waller-Bridge. So that's Fleabag and Killing Eve. Welcome, Jane.
Hi.
Victoria can't be with us, unfortunately, but we do have Connie Fyans. Connie's worked on Cursed, also Watchmen. There was a huge section of that shot, I believe, and also Homeland.
Hi, everyone.
And also we have Madz Abbasi. I hope I'm pronouncing that, Madz, properly. She's an assistant script supervisor.
Yeah.
And
hello.
we have Rachel Bone, who is a trainee script supervisor.
Hi.
So we're going to get into the sort of distinctions between all of that. But I wanted to start by, I wanted to ask like Sarah, Jane, and Connie, how did you become a script supervisor? Because in the US, we tend to come from a lot of different backgrounds. There are a couple of really, really good books, and people do seek out vocational training when they can, but it does tend to be more random and piecemeal. And there's a heavy reliance on just picking things up and learning on the job, So I was wondering, is it the same over there?
No. Yes and no. Certainly, well, Jane can answer better than I. Certainly did pick it up as I went along, and was fortunate that I was sort of starting out when Channel 4 just started, and so it was pretty much a free-for-all. However, the television stations used to be very firm on training, and that's where, Jane, I think you got yours, didn't you?
Yes, I had quite a formal training, really. I worked at one of the independent television companies, and we had a 9-month training scheme. So you had to do across the board. You had to do gallery, be a gallery PA. You had to do the news, sport, light entertainment, drama, all the sort of different disciplines, which was great actually, because it meant that you knew all the different disciplines and you could decide which one you wanted to specialise in. I mean, I knew I wanted to do drama. My father had worked in the industry, and I just knew that exactly what I wanted to do from being about aged 8. So and luckily I loved it when I got to do it. But yeah, that's how I started. And I did do you tended to be put with one particular script supervisor for your main training, and then spend time with other ones, so you learned the different ways that people worked and the different methods of doing it. And then I went on a training course as well by Avril Rowlands, which some of you might have heard of, and which I think Connie did, although I did it
even I did that
about 30 odd years before Connie. But Connie, you might want to say more about that, because that was a big part of your training, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, that was the first part of my training. I looked into it. I asked other script supervisors what they would suggest, and everyone unanimously said do the Avril Rowlands course. So I did that, and then Avril kindly put me up to be script supervisor assistant on 24 when 24 came over and did their last series in London. And then, yeah, so I learned on the job that, like, it was so useful because I got to see loads of script supervisors because there were, like, quite a few units. And I got to kind of jump between all the units and see how they all worked. And that was a 6-month job, so it was a long job. You get to know the crew. It's really great. And that's how I learned, yeah.
I'm trying to remember, like, how long was the Avril Rowlands training? Was it like a week or something?
It's a week. Yeah, you stay up there. And do you know what? I thought it was so great to learn. It's the core, the foundation, the basics. And because her husband is an editor, I think you kind of get that side as well of it, which is really useful.
Yeah, just so everyone knows, like, Avril Rowlands, she was kind of seemed to be for a long time the only person who was specifically training script supervisors in England, you know. So I would sort of maybe compare her to Randy Feldman, who a lot of people here know. She's a script supervisor who lives in LA, but she does every year she does travel to various cities, and she does do sort of training, sort of, and you can do sort of from the basics. And she has a whole program which I think sort of lasts a couple of weeks, where you can sort of specialize on particular sort of areas and stuff like that. So you know, so Avril Rowlands, I think I guess she's retired now, but she also sort of wrote one of the main books in England about script supervising too, I believe.
That's me on Avril Rowlands' course in about 1988. And I'd love to know who the other script supervisors were, but I don't know who they were. I can't remember, apart from one of them.
Yeah, just to go back to what you were saying, Jane, about your training, and you did, you know, a 9-month training scheme. Was that in a sort of a production house or you know, I know the BBC have a training scheme, but is that kind of normal that all the channels have in-house training?
In those days, they did, yes. There was the BBC had their own training scheme, and then because there was just BBC and ITV. We didn't even have Channel 4, so we had BBC, and ITV was split into different regions of the country. I'm in the northwest of England, so it was Granada Television, who I was lucky they were major drama producers as well. So I did a lot of drama as a coordinator before I got to be a script supervisor. So yes, it was 9 months. In fact, although I was classed as a trainee for 9 months, I only actually trained for about 5.5 before I was let loose on my own and doing the news and various live magazine shows on my own, which was pretty nerve-wracking, but it's all very good experience.
Yeah. And Sarah, you said you just kind of picked it up as you went along, is that right?
I started out in production, and then I got a job as sort of like production manager, documentary, very small unit all over the world. And they said, oh, do us a shot list, would you? Which I did. And the camera crew were very helpful and kind and so on. But it wasn't the same as drama at all. Anyway, from there, I just launched myself with the naivety of youth. What could possibly go wrong? And fortunately, nothing dramatic did so. And but I think you keep learning on every job you do, don't you?
Actually, I was just going to say that one of the most valuable parts of my training was doing documentaries, because we had to do documentaries as well. And Granada, everybody had to specialise in every department. So, yeah, or everybody had to do something in every department. And I was lucky when I did my documentaries. I was with a cameraman called David Odd, who's a well-known drama DOP. But he taught me all about lenses, so it was fantastic. So even though I was doing documentaries, I was still learning a lot of skills to take me into drama. So like Sarah said, she learned on the job. I think that's invaluable training. Doing documentaries really is useful, and because you're so much a smaller crew, you get more opportunity to sort of look through the camera and things like that. So did you find that, Sarah?
No, very much so. Yeah. You know, they were very generous and kind and so on. So that was, yeah, splendid. A very good learning curve for me.
Well, what I find interesting too about the UK is that the script supervisor is considered part of the camera department. And, you know, when I was kind of sort of looking through the Beckham website and the rate cards, you know, it sort of lists the rate in the camera department, lists the rate for all the people in the camera department, and the script supervisor is included in that. And then, you know, the Zoom that I attended, that was sort of organized by the Guild of British Camera Technicians, you know. So has that always been the case? Like, has script supervisor always been camera?
Certainly in film it has, but not necessarily in television. That is more recent. But that's it really because the various television companies had their own department. We were called production assistants then. We weren't actually called script supervisors, and we had our own departments and our own subsection within the union, because we did all have to be unionised then as well, which of course we don't have to be now.
Mm-hmm. So when they talk about the, you know, when you're listed on the call sheet, you're listed with the camera department. You wouldn't be listed sort of like by yourself as we are here.
No, we are listed by ourselves. We're not put in with the camera department.
No.
On the call sheet.
No, but on the unit list, the unit list is a sort of grey area. Sometimes you're with the camera department and sometimes you're on your own. But officially we are camera department.
Mm-hmm. And then the history of the job is also interesting too, because from what I understand, it was originally 2 jobs to begin with, and at some point those 2 jobs merged. Is that true?
In television, I think again, it was the case. I can't talk about films. I've only done a couple of movies. I'm very much a television person, and in the way it worked in independent television, and I think in the BBC, we did all the script side of it, all the dealing with the actors and everything, and there was a job which was called production secretary actually, which, because things were very different then in the production office, and the production secretary would do the continuity sheets, your facing pages, get all the technical details from the camera department, and type them up. The only thing that they would come to us for is for any notes from the director. So of any notes from the director, you pass on, or you know, any performance notes, anything like that, you pass on. But the actual technical things were done by the production secretary, and all her notes would come to you at the end of the day to sort of check and make sure that all the relevant director's notes had gone through. Now, I am going back a long way. I'm going back to the 80s, so you know, things changed early. I would say sort of 1990, 91, things changed and became much more as it is now, just a script supervisor.
Mm-hmm. So if I'm sort of following you right, there was always someone who was more to do with the script and working with the directors and actors, and then there was somebody else who went around and got camera information, you know, and sort of took photos, took Polaroids, like, you know, and checked continuity, and sort of would do sort of little errands and tasks while the main person stayed by director.
No, it was the production secretary only did the camera, the sheets, only did the continuity sheets. Continuity was completely down to the script supervisor, so all the liaisons with the director, all the sort of talk about crossing the line, any of that, any you know, doing camera plans, diagrams of the set, any of that would be done by the script supervisor. The production secretary only did the sheets, which was quite an easy job really for some of them, especially if you weren't shooting many setups a day.
Just to go back to training, there is a lot of sort of like government funded educational schemes, you know, like Screen Skills has a lot of programs for people getting into the industry, and they really sort of cultivate mentorship relationships. You know, in the US, we don't really have an apprenticeship type system. You know, there are people who manage to sort of seek out mentors, you know, if the mentors agree to sort of take on that role. But it seems like that's something that's more natural in the UK industry. Maybe Rachel and Madz, you might want to sort of talk about that. Like, did you find mentors coming into industry at your way in?
So Rachel and I actually did the same training, and that was under Sarah and another script supervisor, Diana Dale. And that's how we actually first met. And I think we both, Rachel, did you have funding on that as well?
Yeah, I did too, because I was in between contracts and I was working in production. So yeah, it really helped getting the funding.
It really did help having the funding and also having the mentorship, I think, because my background is I've done a lot of short films, and I was a makeup artist before I was a script supervisor. So I knew the floor, but I didn't know the role. And so I first did a 2-day masterclass with Lisa Vick, who's done a lot of film script supervising, which was great. It was a great beginning, but it really wasn't, you really can't learn unless you're on the floor doing the job. So I just took what I learned and applied it to more shorts, and eventually realized I still need more training. And I think the course with Sarah and Diana was really helpful. How did you find it, Rachel?
Yeah, it was really, I really enjoyed it because we did a lot of practical exercises. Like we filmed each other and tried to spot continuity errors, and it was really fun as well. And yeah, I'm from production background, so I kind of knew more about the paperwork side from the like progress report, but not how it kind of what plays out on the floor. So, and I had done some shadowing, but you can't learn anything from doing a few days shadowing. You need to get stuck in there. So it was really, really good to do that course to get some grounding.
I will say that in terms of like, from my perspective as being an assistant, I've only been an assistant for probably 1.5 years now. And I find that when I've assisted script supervisors who have not had assistants previously, they're always quite surprised by how helpful it is, because our job as assistants, at least I view it, is to alleviate the workload for my script supervisor, so my boss doesn't have to go home and do hours of overtime. Like, I'm there to make sure that they have life outside of production. That's how I see it.
Mm-hmm. How would you sort of make the distinction between what is a script supervisor and what is an assistant script supervisor?
I think it entirely depends on my boss, because if they are used to having an assistant, I find that they're quite familiar with delegating the work, and usually they will manage the continuity and perhaps getting the information from the floor, especially in COVID times. I'm sure Karen is a script supervisor that Rach and I will be working with, or I'll be joining in September on a production that she's working on, and because of COVID she'll have to be getting the camera information. But usually I've worked with Karen before previously, and if she's really busy, I will get the camera information for her so that she can solely focus on continuity, and maybe when revisions come in, she can do the timings, I'll do the pages for her. It's more, I find that I manage a lot of the admin for her. If it's a script supervisor who has not had an assistant previously, I tend to shadow them a little bit, or I'm just there to see how they work, because every script supervisor works differently, they have their own systems. And then I basically, once they see that I'm competent, because there's always this protection I find with script supervisors who haven't had an assistant, they're kind of fearful to let you in. So I just have a discussion with my boss and I say, what would you feel comfortable with me doing? Do you want me to use your templates? Do you want me to make a template for you? And it's just a matter of trust and building that trust and seeing that, you know, they can offload work onto you, but it takes a few days. It's generally better on longer form content rather than shorter form content, because you need to build that relationship.
Right. And when you find yourself in situations when you're assisting for a script supervisor who has not been used to having an assistant, like what, how did that situation occur? Is that because they realized they need an assistant even though they weren't quite sure how that would help them?
Yeah, I've had it where either it's because, so for example, I was on The Crown last year with Karen, who's very used to having an assistant. And then for the second block of filming, we had a different script supervisor who I'm sure she won't mind me naming her, Alana, who's fantastic. And she's not really had an assistant before. So she had an assistant. Well, she took me on as an assistant because the Crown is so used to having script supervisor assistants. So it was something that production offered her and she agreed to carry on. So I think it comes from production when that happens, or a suggestion from a previous supervisor from which they're taking over.
Okay, so there's been cases where production has actually sort of seen the need for somebody to sort of help out, maybe a two script supervisor situation.
Yeah.
Right.
My first trainee job, I was with Jane Jackson, and she asked for a trainee at the beginning of shoot, and production said no, and then it got busier and busier and busier, and then they saw how snowed under she was, and then they got me on after that. So yeah, it's whether production
situation as well.
Yeah.
Rachel, how would you describe the difference between a trainee and an assistant? What's the distinction there?
I've never been an assistant, so I'm still in the early stages. But it's learning. I think, like Madz said, it's learning how your boss works and how they want to delegate the work to you. So when I worked with Jane, I ended up, I think in the first week I was with her, she's like, "Can you go off and do the splinter unit?" I was like, what do I do? But she trusted me enough to just give me the basic laydown of how to go about things, and she uses Peter Scarrett, so I learned how to use that on that shoot. I think assistant, like, because I'm in early stages, it's more getting the grounding in like, how to manage the workload for your script supervisor and be that helping hand, really.
Because presumably, like, you know, you would be paid differently as a trainee versus being paid as an assistant, you know. So are there situations where a script supervisor is snowed under, needs help, asks production for an assistant, and they say, well, we'll get you a trainee?
You know what, I'm not sure, because it's quite hard to even get an assistant, isn't it?
Yeah, I've been in a situation last year when I was doing dailies, and the script supervisor, it was for a feature film. She was the second unit script supervisor, and her assistant, because of a scheduling issue, her assistant had booked time off. And so I don't know why production did this, but they then decided, rather than just get a temporary assistant script supervisor for the blocked time where the main assistant wasn't available, they were getting a different assistant every day. So it's almost like a trainee, because it was a completely different workflow, and I felt so bad for her. She was having to manage her role as well as trying to teach someone new every day. I'm not sure why production did that. I feel like that was an error on their part, but that's quite a rare case. I feel like that doesn't happen that often.
Yeah, because my funding's from Screen Skills for this trainee job. So production, like when they get trainees from Screen Skills, whether it's camera, makeup, costume, the money comes from them. So production actually they don't mind so much because they don't have to pay out. But I think it's not the case for having an assistant. They have to pay.
But does that mean that as a trainee on a training scheme, you would be placed by the training scheme?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. So that would be, I guess that would be sort of similar, like in the DGA, the assistant directors, they have a sort of DGA training system, you know, so it's the DGA that would sort of place their trainees on various productions. So that, you know, it's in that situation, it's not a cost to production. I mean, how common is it for a script supervisor to have an assistant? I mean, you know, like Jane, Sarah, and Connie, have you always been able to get an assistant when you've asked for one? Like, do you have to campaign a lot to hire one and really sort of persuade production for that help?
It's really difficult to get. Well, it depends on the project actually. Something like The Crown, which is, you know, big budget, and that I think it's slightly easier. But I would certainly always try and get a trainee, because I'm passionate about teaching people and training, and I think it is the only way that people can really learn, is to be on set with you. So I love having a trainee, but even getting a trainee is very difficult. And I was in a situation last year where I was doing a film. I asked for an assistant and was told no, there was nothing in the budget. And it's a director I work with a lot. I knew that he would want all my input into the script and everything. I would be snowed under. You know, 3 weeks in, they could see I was working 20-hour days, and then said I could have an assistant. But you know, as Madz says, it's quite hard to then get an assistant when you're already up and shooting, because you're so busy. You know what it's like. You're so busy. You've not got a minute in the day anyway. So then to try and explain to somebody how you work, it's hard. It's far better if you can have somebody from the beginning of a job, so they know how you work. You've got a relationship with them and everything, rather than have to try and build that while you're shooting, trying to manage all the other stuff that's going on as well. But it did help. I had a very good assistant, and you know, it was very useful, but she probably didn't do as much for me as if I'd had her right from the beginning.
Would you agree with that, Connie?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I actually find it really, really rare to ever get an assistant, and if or a trainee. If I always ask at the start of the job. Like if I know it's going to be, I tend to do big, well, high-end dramas, but over a long, so like over 8 or 10 episodes. So it's constant, and usually you don't get the scripts till after you shoot the first block, and then you're like constantly feels like you're chasing your tail. So I always ask for one, because it's all the little things like printing off the amends so you can go read them, or just reading them and letting you know if there's massive changes, or jumping in to your block or something while you run to the loo, or things like that. But I find that I never really have them as much as I try. So it's really still rare in England, but we are trying to, that's what we were trying to do with the quiz. We were trying to kind of like educate production and saying, when we ask for assistants or trainees, we're not just asking so we can pick our feet back and have a nice coffee. We're actually asking because we really do actually need this. We're not just but yeah, I find it really rare.
Yeah, I mean, I when I did the first series of Killing Eve, for instance, I asked to have either an assistant or a trainee, because I was doing the whole series. There's 3 different directors, 8 episodes, a lot of foreign travel. I just knew, because I knew the first director very well, I knew that there would be a lot of second unit, and so I knew that if I'd had an assistant, the assistant could then have gone and done the second unit, obviously being paid as the proper rate, not an assistant rate, because that's not on. Or if I'd had a trainee, they could have got somebody in to do second unit, but the trainee would have known the show better, so could have gone and helped the second unit script supervisor much more. But they wouldn't go for it. They really wouldn't. And I managed, but it was hard work, and just because Phoebe rewrites constantly, she's always rewriting, so the script's constantly changing, the story's constantly changing. It would have been good to have somebody else that was across all 8 episodes who knew the scripts as well as I did, because I felt by the end I was the only person who'd been there right from the beginning who knew the entire story. So the cast were very heavily dependent on me, and it would have been a great experience for an assistant or a trainee, but it would have been brilliant for a trainee to learn. And I just think it's short-sighted, and they ended up paying me a fortune in overtime, fortune. So it probably wouldn't have cost anything like as much. Somebody would have learned, and I would have been more sane by the end of it.
Sarah, you're very involved with training. Like, do you, because of that, do you feel that you're in a good position to really make production see sense in hiring an assistant?
No. Our quiz where we first met, as Connie said, was entirely skewed towards production, seeing it and saying, you know, look, this would really make a difference, etc., etc. And I don't think there was a single production person there. They'd all been invited, the Guild of Production Managers and various. And so it's a battle to get them, because obviously it's always a budget thing as well. But as Jane says, they're going to save a fortune. And also, you know, if you're so tired and so overworked that you miss something, what's a reshoot going to cost you?
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, we never make mistakes, but if by accident we had, after doing who knows how many weeks, 20-hour days, I think it's forgivable.
Well, we had a situation on Killing Eve again where they got a second unit script supervisor in. I'd given her a load of notes, continuity notes and everything. She obviously hadn't read them. And they shot this whole sequence and all the stuff on the table was all in completely the wrong order. And so the action didn't match what they were supposed to be matching. So they had to reshoot it again. Now, had I had an assistant or a trainee that had been there with this second unit script supervisor, that wouldn't have happened. So that was an example where it cost them a lot of money. Unnecessarily.
I just want to talk in more detail about the different ways that an assistant script supervisor can help you, because I'm sure it's different depending on the main script supervisor. But in the US, on the few occasions when I've heard of somebody bringing in someone to an assistant, it hasn't been for an entire job. It's been for a particular day or a particular episode, a particular situation. And one of those situations is when they know they're going to be shooting this episode with 5 cameras, or they're going to be shooting a riot, and there's just going to be multiple cameras, like shooting handheld, you know. And in those situations, a script supervisor has decided that they are going to look at A and B cameras and maybe bring in somebody to look at C and D cameras. You know, in our situation, we wouldn't be bringing in an assistant. We would be bringing in another full-on script supervisor. Is that something that's familiar to the way that assistants work over there?
I think it does happen sometimes like that. Personally, it's not how I'd work, because I think that I feel like you've got to know everything that's going on with all the cameras, because, for instance, if you see cameras shooting a 2-shot, but then your A camera does a single of one of those people that's been in the 2-shot, you know, how do you split that? So I think, but that, I mean, maybe that's just me. I don't know what the others think. I would use an assistant to help with paperwork and amendments and just the general sort of running of the show, and just. But I've never been in a situation where they've only come in for odd days. So maybe the others might have different opinions, and Madz might be able to enlighten us a bit more.
I mean,
yeah, Connie, you look like you wanted to say something.
I mean, I've had, the only way I've managed to get sometimes with certain productions, managed to get assistants in on the big days, because they say, oh, well, you seem to be coping, but maybe on this day where there's like 7 cameras and a crane, maybe you might want one then, and you're like, okay. So if it's the only way I can get it sometimes, I do really appreciate it. And then when they come in like that, because I don't know them, and I don't, it is hard to let go sometimes, I do agree. And I don't know what their abilities are, how much they know. I do kind of, for them to get camera setups really useful, for them to go and check out, oh, C camera's gone up a mountain on the other side of the lake. Is it all right if you jump onto that unit and just keep an eye? Because usually with more cameras, they tend to just wander off and shoot little things, and it's really handy rather than finding out from an AD half an hour later and going, oh, well, I can't leave. So I do find that they do that when they come in for the odd day. And it is handy. They can go around and make sure they take photos of the whole set, just in case you haven't had time. But I kind of tend to stick to doing my notes myself when they come in as dailies, because I don't know what their abilities are.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that's different though, isn't it, for you, Sharon? Because if a unit was going off to shoot, you'd have to have a script supervisor with them, wouldn't you? If there was sound anyway.
Yeah, and really, like, if there's not sound, I mean, if there's an actor doing something, even without sound, that's still continuity. I mean, hopefully in these cases, like, we'd be able to look at the schedule, or some units are sort of, they will give a heads up, and then, you would pin them down and say, well, you're going to bring in this, right? But yeah, there's very sort of particular situations, there was one time I brought in another script supervisor when I was doing an episode where we were shooting 5 cameras, but I'm saying, it's not a situation where it would have been helpful to split up the cameras, because the whole point of it was I just needed to see the whole picture, and you can't see the whole picture if you're not looking at all the cameras, so in that situation, that person really was kind of only doing one task, which was to stay on book with the actors, be closer to them, and watch the continuity of the props that were moving around, because we were doing very, very long takes. I mean, it helped a little bit, and it was definitely worth bringing that person in, but I couldn't really sort of imagine sort of like breaking up. Have you experienced something like that, Madz?
I've only had it where, as Connie was saying, if we've had an extra camera in and it's shooting elsewhere from the set, which has happened a few times, or for reshoots, sometimes I'm brought in to do like second unit, splinter unit kind of things. Usually that's from script supervisors who I've either already worked with or have recommended me to another script supervisor, so they kind of know that I'm adaptable to whatever workflow is needed. But I'm not usually doing the continuity if like my boss is there to do the continuity. That's something that's their job, really, like. And unless they want to train me up, if it's a slow day and they're wanting to see, sometimes, like, if it's a really slow day and there's only one scene that we're shooting and there's only 2 cameras, then maybe they'll be like, okay, I'm gonna go have a half an hour break and I'm gonna see how you do and come check on you and that kind of thing. Or not really half an hour, but a little break kind of thing. And that's usually, that comes way down the line. That's probably come after, like, I don't know, 2 months of working with them and them knowing that I understand their workflow and everything, and it comes from complete trust. I've never had that with a script supervisor who I don't know or hasn't known me that well. So the physical side of doing continuity usually is splinter unit from my regard and second unit, but that's after I've worked with the script supervisor for a significant amount of time and we've built a relationship together. But if I don't know the script supervisor that well, I will only do the physical continuity if it's a C camera, for example, doing cutaway shots and probably not any actors, or maybe stunt doubles, maybe. Again, depends on the situation. In terms of admin, again, depends on the trust of the script supervisor. On a basic level, I'll be getting camera information and any other information they need, any revisions from production, I'll be running and getting that for them, scanning revisions, making notes of what's been revised. Sometimes I'll do the page count of what's been revised and they'll give me the timings, or sometimes I don't usually do the timings. Timings I always get from my boss, but it depends. And sometimes I will be doing more than that. And if a script supervisor is used to writing by hand, a lot of editors want digital notes now, so I'll be doing the typing and that kind of thing. But yeah, it just depends on the relationship. It depends on how much trust you have with your boss.
Mm-hmm. Rachel, what are the ways that you felt that you've been most helpful? Supervisor?
Well, the job that me and Madz are on, I only had 2 weeks on it, and then COVID hit, so it was early days on that one. But
is that a job where you have you have a script supervisor, you have an assistant, and you have a trainee? So there's like a sort of three-tier department.
This is the first time for me doing that on the current project. So
how
I think
does that break down with the three of you then?
I think the way it's going to work is because now we're going to have to be remote as well from Karen. So she's going to send us the notes to do all the admin tasks from the office. I think we've got monitors. I'll find out tomorrow because it's the first day back tomorrow. But
wow.
Yeah. So that'll be interesting.
Is she remote too, or is she on set?
She'll be on set, but everyone else is away from set. So,
wow.
But yeah. So when we've got second unit days, the assistant will then go and do those parts, and I'll become the assistant for Karen for the main unit. I think that's the way she's going to work it. You said before, but I don't know with how things are now, it might change. But my last job, I was the trainee, and I was tasked with, you know, helping with the amendments, like Madz said, doing any sort of like paperwork, scanning stuff, helping like just get coffees sometimes when Jane couldn't get out. And then she was like training me when she had time in between, like, oh, look out for this, see what you can match up with that. And also I learned the software whilst I was on the job with Peter Scarrett, so that was really helpful. And then when I did do the like the cutaways, the C camera stuff, I just did it all on there and pinged it across to her, so it was useful.
Yeah. And then there's been situations that I've heard where the paperwork actually is shared, so there are people sort of going into the paperwork and sort of you know, the information is coming from the script supervisor, the information is coming from the assistant script supervisor. So so the paperwork is kind of being shared. You know, I agree with you, Connie, like having been used to always doing everything myself. And of course, every script supervisor, you know, we all have our own system. We all have our idiosyncrasies. You know, on one hand, I find this really remarkable, but on the other hand, I feel really uncomfortable about that. You know, like if I was working on set and, you know, somebody was getting camera information on another camera and then putting it in my notes for me. And then I think was it you, Jane, who sort of described you would sometimes, you know, give the edit log for your assistant to do, and so they would just have like, you know, they could sort of own that form and sort of take responsibility for that. Like, is that something that when you talked about them helping you with your paperwork, is that what you meant?
Well, no, I've actually had my assistant share my document with me. I've had, if we're on the same, because I use Microsoft OneDrive, and if you're on the same Wi-Fi network, you can both be in the document at the same time, and so both working on it, both changing it. And so she was setting up all the sheets, because of course our paperwork is slightly different than yours anyway, in that we do one sheet per setup.
Right.
And our sheets go in shooting order rather than in scene order as well. So, you know, because of the British slating system as well. So,
which we'll talk about later on.
Yeah, which we'll talk about. But so she would set up, say, slate one of the day. She'd set up the sheet. She would type in all the date, the sets, the roll number, the sound roll number, all the sort of basics, and she would do the shot description, although a lot of the time I wanted to amend that slightly. She would do the timing of each take, and she would put the camera details in, because she was getting camera details, because I was just so busy with script things that I didn't have physically time to go to the camera department. And I would then put in any notes from my director, who did give a lot of notes for the editor. So I had a lot of notes to add in, but I could add those in while she was in the document as well. So it worked really well. There was a couple of occasions, if one of us had dropped off the Wi-Fi network, there was a slight, it didn't sync quite correctly. It was so easy to sort out, and it really did work like a dream. And she would do the edit log, but she wouldn't put in like the selected takes. She'd do all the other stuff, because obviously she wasn't sat with the director, so she didn't know which takes he preferred or anything. So I'd fill those in. But again, it was a shared document. And I know
that's interesting. So it sort of sounds like, you know, she would be doing all the subjective information, you know, all the factual information, and then you would come into the same document and embellish with the subjective responses that you hear from your director, what you personally observe, what you personally intuit about the take. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Oh.
And sometimes, you know, she'd made notes which I wouldn't have made on a sheet, you know, that were unnecessary. So because I was trying to teach her as well, you know, because everybody has got to learn. So rather than just sort of deleting it all and everything, I would try and have a chat with her about it, about why that wasn't important for the editor to know, or why something that she hadn't put in was important to know. And I think she did find it, you know, really useful, and I found it was great, because at the end of the day, my notes were practically done, really. Unheard of.
Connie and Sarah, what do you think about that kind of system where like two people are kind of like, you know, dipping into the same paperwork like that? Is that something that would work for you?
The way I've done it before, I've shared it in terms of marking up the script. I use a digital system to mark up the script. And the way it worked, I would just hand my iPad over, and then Rasheen, who was my assistant, would work trainee and then made up to assistant. And she would just, after a setup, you know, fill it in, or whenever there was a moment, and show me what she'd done. And so the only thing that I ended up doing in the end was actually typing up the notes myself, and otherwise I had her on editor's log, and so most of the details, the progress report, I did the final thing, and so on. So no, I didn't have a shared document the way that Jane did, but certainly shared iPad or jump on my laptop if I was off somewhere, whatever. And that worked very well for us.
Right. And you would still be lining the script yourself, like you would only sort of give
No, she did the marking up for me, the line. Yeah, marvelous. And then would show me, and you know, it was always perfectly fine and right, and she got it right.
So that probably means, you know, she must also be physically very close to you too, you know. So are you all?
No, they were fairly confined sets, and I was by the director and a monitor there, and she was with the other. Which do you say Video Village as well, with a monitor sort of offset?
Yeah. So you would be at Director's Village, and she would be at the sort of maybe bigger
makeup and costume.
Right.
Another bonus was she always gave me all the gossip, which you don't get if you're on set.
No.
Yeah. And did you find that you know, she was still able to keep on top of like dialogue changes and sort of little aberrations and all of that happens from take to take?
Totally. Yeah, she was great.
Connie, like, would you use an assistant in that way?
Yeah, I mean, for me, every assistant, like every script supervisor, is different, and what I trust them to do and what I get them to do are completely different. So I try to build a relationship in that sense. But what's rare about me is that I've been an assistant and I've been on the other side now. So when I was an assistant, I mean, we were together for 6 months, kind of. So we built a relationship in which she would do all her notes on a notepad. She would give me those, and we built a system, and so I would actually do all her electronic notes and all the marked up script, which was fantastic for me because I learned so much in that sense. which I could then bring on. I don't do that as a script supervisor. I don't think I can give that much control up. But
yeah, that sounds like you were doing all the paperwork pretty much in that situation, right?
I mean, she would obviously check it all and make sure everything was fine. But I think it was quite fast paced and moving and stuff. So I would just take the ones that she was done with and try and read her writing. But as a script supervisor, what I tend to do is I'm like Jane, I share the document with them. And I start with the camera setups and all that kind of stuff. And then I check it and I go, this is what I would do personally if I was writing it. But obviously everyone's different. Everyone works differently. And then we build up, and eventually I like to teach them every single part of the note system taken. So then it's the best way to learn for them, I feel, as well. And then, yeah, that's what I do.
And then like when would an assistant be considered qualified to be a script supervisor? Because it sounds like you bring on an assistant, you have them for the whole job. And by the time that something pops up like a second unit or a splinter unit, you know, you can trust them to sort of go off on their own to supervise that. You know, is that just something you sort of judge, you know, from person to person, you know? Like does an assistant script supervisor know that they're not a trainee anymore because they've gotten enough days on set in the field on their own?
Yeah, I don't think it's not a formalised thing that you've got to have done so many days before you can be an assistant, but I think people generally know when they're ready to move up. I think Madz and Connie, you'd probably agree with that, wouldn't you? That you'd know when you're ready. And I think certainly most assistants I've had, you would always feel, or you would take them on thinking that they would be capable of doing your second unit for you.
Mm-hmm.
But again, as I say, not as an assistant, as they would have to be paid as a script supervisor, because otherwise it's exploitation. In my book, it's exploitation. You know, you've got to pay people correctly. If they, you know, normally they would have a second unit script supervisor. So if the assistant is going to do that, that is, you know, that's the job that they're doing. So they should be paid as that. And I'm very strict about that. I don't know if that happens with you, Madz, if that's what you're made up to be a script supervisor.
100%. I'm always bumped up on the days that I have to do splinter and second unit, and I would refuse. Like, I know how much we fight as a department to even get the rates that we deserve, so I would refuse to do it for any less anyway. And it's never been an unreasonable request when that's happened. Like, production they're more willing to have someone who's been on the production from the start and knows the storylines and knows the way the script supervisor and the editorial team like to work anyway. So I've never had a problem with having to bump up the rate if I'm doing second unit or splinter unit.
Yeah. So the moment you're sent out on your own, you know, that should be like an automatic thing, you know, because that happens, you know, I'm sure that happens in camera over there, but it happens over here that, you know, when we have, you know, another unit and, you know, a camera first goes with a camera to do this unit. And then what ends up happening is the second AC ends up like bumping up to be the focus puller. And then, you know, then you have to sort of bring in an additional person to do the, you know, the slating for that day, you know, so everyone kind of sort of like bumps up for, you know, as soon as that unit splits away. So that's good to hear that, you know, that happens for script supervisors too. And, you know, I was worried about that because it kind of did seem like a sort of gray area if you have an assistant on for the entire job. You know, it's just like, well, you know, conveniently they're in a good position to take care of this extra work, you know, that, you know, we just found out about.
There are occasions when productions see it like that, but, you know, certainly from my point of view, I would never allow that. If they don't want to pay, then I would say, no, I need my assistant and you can get somebody else in, because it's just not fair to anybody.
Yeah. And when you say, you know, when an assistant is ready to sort of move up, is that just a case of, you know, switching how you're classified in a roster or something like that?
I think it's just luck, really. I mean, I know I've had assistants who have been ready to move up, but just making that break is really hard. But then, I mean, certainly on one occasion, I was offered a job by a director that had done a couple of episodes that my assistant had been on as well. I couldn't do the job, but I said to him, "How about trying her?" And he did, and it worked out. And you know, she moved on in that way. So I think that sometimes can happen because, you know, directors sometimes would prefer somebody they know rather than a complete unknown, even if that person is slightly less experienced. So that's the experience I've had of it. But I don't know what, Connie, you're probably better placed to answer that one.
I mean, it's odd for me because looking back now, I don't actually feel that I was qualified enough to step up when I did step up. But I mean, I've definitely learned, and that's the best way to learn is on the job. And you look back and you're going, "Oh God!"
Fake it until you make it.
Yeah, I mean, everyone does that a little bit, surely, hopefully. So I think it's a bit of both. I think it's the assistant being ready to be like, I think I've done enough of this to understand completely what they do and try it out. I mean, I've had quite a few assistants recently email me and ask me, they think they're ready, so how can they make that jump? And I think it's so hard because it's kind of like asking, how do you get into the industry? I mean, even though you're in, how do you make that jump? And I think it is down to maybe knowing a director or knowing a production manager that will take a chance in you and things. So I don't think it changes on a list or anything. It's
Yeah, just to go back to what you were saying about directors being familiar, you know, because, you know, on a lot of projects, you know, like, you know, directors are very particular people too, and it's kind of part of our job to adapt to them and their idiosyncrasies, you know, and in some situations it's very difficult to sort of foster, you know, to sort of gain that trust. You know, sometimes it comes quick, sometimes it takes a while to settle in, you know, but it does tend to be a very intimate relationship. You know, have you has there ever been sort of issues with when you've had an assistant or trainee, you know, and a director has not sort of liked having an extra person sort of within their sort of inner circle, you know?
Yeah, it happened to me last year. It was an American production actually, and practically everybody was American apart from the director and I and the assistant, and but the director took against not took against, but didn't really like my assistant, and neither did the producer. So they asked if she could be somewhere else, which was slightly unfair, I thought, because she was doing a very good job. But it worked. We made it work, and it was all fine. And she learnt a lot. And I've had an email from her today where, you know, we stayed friendly. So I don't think she was ever aware that there was any sort of problem, and it was completely unfounded anyway. It was just that I think he just wanted all my attention, didn't want me giving any attention to anybody else. I think that's all it was.
Mm-hmm. Madz, do you find yourself having to sort of, you know, tread carefully in certain situations?
If only on the days when I am covering my boss, if for some reason my boss has had to take a personal day or yeah, just can't or is ill and I'm having to step up to cover her, which I have done. I have done main unit coverage before. Sometimes the director can be a bit like, because they're not used to seeing me, because usually I'm at a desk with a monitor, not in their space with the actors. So I think sometimes they're a bit like, oh, but they're usually fine. I think if they trust my boss to trust me, then usually they're fine. But it depends. Some directors are very sensitive. Some of them don't. I don't know. I think it depends on the person. It's such a personal thing.
Yeah. Well, I was curious just because, you know, if it is kind of known that supervisors on occasion do have assistants, do have trainees, you know, whether, you know, because there's been times when there's been an extra person to help out the script supervisor, and everyone thinks it's very strange, you know. It's just like, you know, why you've got a little helper, you know, like what's that all about, you know? And it's a very sort of like unique and strange thing, and it's just like, you know, why are you so special that you decided you got an assistant today? You know, so
Well,
that is
sorry
strange.
to interrupt. I was just, I don't know whether it's because we're also considered to be so amicable or associated with camera department, because camera department have so many ACs and trainees that I don't think sometimes it's like, oh, you have an assistant, like, but usually they're quite accepting quite quickly, because I guess we're kind of in sync with camera, and if camera can have that many people in their department, why can't we?
I've often found that, I mean, on the job I'm on now, the first AD was saying to me, you should have an assistant. There's so much work. We should do so many setups today. Why haven't you got an assistant? And so I think it is more accepted maybe over here that our workload and the fact that we go home every night and work, and especially when you're away, and they all see that you're never in the bar. At night, you're always the one working. I think they realise much more.
It's good when, you know, somebody can sort of recognize that instead of you having to prove it, you know, because a lot of our work is lonely work, you know. It's just like we are in a room alone prepping. We are in a room alone sort of, you know, like an hour, 2 hours after wrap, still doing the notes, you know. So not a lot of people sort of witness that. They just see the result, you know, which is like when the script notes land, you know, and then that's all they care about is like, you know, when it's delivered, you know, and it was delivered, you know, but they don't really sort of think about the fact that you didn't get to really sort of like have your full lunch break, you know, or, you know, there was like a splinter camera, there was like 3 cameras, there was an extra camera, you know, the truck was far away, you know, all the other things that you have to do before you can actually even sit down to do your work.
I think that's the most frustrating thing about trying to tell people that we do need assistants or trainees, is because with grips or with cameras or with electricians, it's much more manual, and people can see when they're struggling or when they need more bodies or manpower. But with us, it's usually like the end product, isn't it? So people don't really know what goes on to be able to create that end product. So that's the frustration, I think, with it.
Yeah, people don't really know what a brain implosion looks like.
Only another script supervisor.
Yeah, exactly. I just want to move on and just talk about process. I do get the feeling that UK script supervisors are more involved in prep, you know, like, you know, you go on recce's, which is, we call it tech scouts over here. It's kind of rare when we do that. It has been known to happen, but in general, it's not a thing. We usually get invited to table reads, but we don't always get invited to rehearsals. You know, if you're working on a really busy television show, like I may meet the director once at the production meeting for episode 1, and then the other directors that come afterwards, I might not meet them until the first day on set, because if I'm shooting, I'm not able to go to production meetings anymore. Have you, you know, would you say that's like a true assessment?
Yeah, I think the tech recce, tech scout is that's not the norm that script supervisors go on them. I mean, I always try to, but quite often the crew will be like, oh, what are you doing here? The script supervisor doesn't normally come back. You know, I know quite a lot of people do like to come because it's so useful, but it's not the norm. But certainly, I would say rehearsals it is, and definitely the table, the read-through as we call it. But when you do, you know, sometimes it is hard to have any time with the subsequent directors. I mean, I've done a lot of long-running series, and sometimes you only have a quick chat with subsequent directors before you say, like you say, day one on set, which is hard sometimes.
The other thing is that it cuts into your prep time as well, because you're always having to fight for extra prep. You know, they have in their head that you'll need so many days for so much amount of you know, minutes and so on. And so if you do attend rehearsals and the production meeting, and if you can get to check recce's, you find yourself doing an awful lot of your breaking down of the script and so on in your own time anyway, because they won't acknowledge that you need that amount.
Yeah, I mean, I like to go on the check record because I find that it really helps me. That's a huge part of my prep, and the way I work is visualizing it, and far more. I'm not somebody who can sit and read a script, and I do it far more by seeing the locations and listening to the director talk about how he's going to shoot it and everything. So that's just a personal thing for me. That's how I work. So I find it works for me, and then I'll sit on the bus in between locations, typing my breakdown and that. But just a question for you, Sharon. I've got, if you do a long running series, say with 3 directors or more, how much prep do you get for subsequent episodes?
Well, in general, say for like a 1-hour show, I would tend to get 2 days of prep for a 1-hour show. I think for half hour, it's 1 day. This is a weird contractual thing because it's in our contract, but it only refers to the first episode. You know, it doesn't say anything about the rest of the show. And you know, my argument is like, why would I do more work on episode 1 and do less on the other episodes? But I think the reason it's kind of vague is that, you know, if you're in a situation where you're the only script supervisor, then you can't really take 2 days to do the prep because you would be working the 6th day and the 7th day, and you know, they don't want to pay that. And a lot of script supervisors actually would just refuse to work 7 days a week, you know. So there's, yeah, it's a sort of tricky situation, you know. So what ends up happening in my situation, you know, I'm sure it's different because everyone has to sort of work out their own solutions, but in my situation, I would end up doing a 6th day, but a really long 6th day. So I would jam 2 days worth of work into 1 day so that they would only pay the sort of 6th day, but I would make sure that that 6th day was the equivalent of 2 normal days.
Yeah, no, I've done similar. Yeah, I've done similar. But we sometimes have, sometimes, not always, but for instance on Killing Eve, there was a week in between the blocks, so that was my prep week. So it meant that I did get to spend some time with subsequent directors as well, which was quite useful. But that's not always the case.
Yeah, when you're working on an ongoing show, you know, like one that's going through like, you know, an episode every 8 days or whatever, you know, when they have the production meeting, when they have the tech scout, then obviously there's a separate AD department. Sometimes there's a different DP. Then they, you know, those people can go off and sort of do those kind of things. Often people like the gaffer, prop master, they might go to do that meeting for the day, and then they might have their second be on set and sort of step up and sort of, you know, supervise that sort of situation. You know, obviously we're not in this sort of situation where we can do that. There has been situations where a few script supervisors have managed to bring in someone just to attend a production meeting and sort of convey notes and just to sort of be their point person. That has sort of worked out well for some people. But you know, things like table readings, I don't know whether you have that over there, but a lot of times they might do that at lunch, and they don't want to pay you because you'd be in lunch penalties, which could be quite severe in the US. So they'll sort of provide lunch for everyone, and then they'll sort of invite you to be there. So they'll sort of leave it on you, you know, they'll say like, it's up to you if you want to attend, but if you want to attend, there's lunch there. But you know, you're not going to be paid for it. So if you feel like going, you will get fed.
Right.
So there's kind of like workarounds like that, you know, and some people take it, some people don't, you know. It's you know, there's a lot of sort of situations that come up, you know, when you're the sole script supervisor. Obviously, if you're on a show where you're alternating, I think, do you call it double banking over there, or do you call it something else? When you have 2 script supervisors and you're kind of alternating episodes.
No, we just call it alternating. Double banking is when there's 2 units running simultaneously.
Right, right, okay, okay. What about editorial? Because it sounds like that is something that's more natural for script supervisors to be in contact with. Like, it doesn't seem uncommon for script supervisors to visit editing suites, where, you know, it is a bit here, I think partly because we have a lot of bi-coastal production. So there's a lot of post that happens in LA, so it's physically not a thing for us to visit editing suites. Obviously, if you're working on a feature and you have a good relationship with the director or the editor, you know, you might be invited to sort of drop in at some point, you know. But I was wondering if anybody had any thoughts about that.
Go on, somebody else speak, because I'm doing all the talking.
Because it started to rain, I've just got to go and get some things in. I'll be back in a minute.
Get the washing in.
It's the furniture.
For me, when I was first starting out, I obviously went into the editorial. I found that so helpful in knowing, once I've shot it all, in knowing what are the big things to look out for, what they use my notes for, and all that kind of stuff. But to be honest, I mean, I do talk to them a lot. I kind of ring them sometimes when I want to, if we have a good relationship and stuff. But I find it more and more difficult because, like US productions, they're either actually in America, the editors, or they're editing while we're shooting. So you don't really get the chance to ever go in. I always try to afterwards, after we finish shooting, and see how they're getting on. But it's pretty similar, I would say.
Yeah, I think
the same as well. There's no real time when you're shooting, but I would always talk to the editor, certainly 2 or 3 times a week, if not every day. And if I have an assistant or a trainee, I will make sure that they spend time in the edit suite, because it's the best. It's after the set, it's the next best place to learn, because you can see, you've shot a scene one day, you go and see it being edited the next day, and you can see all the things that you should have been looking out for that you didn't, and the things that you spent a long time angsting about that you didn't even need to think about. So I always make sure that assistants and trainees do spend time in the edit suite, you know, on a maybe a quieter day for the main unit. But no, it's not something that you get much chance to do.
Mm-hmm. Connie, I know that you've worked on a bunch of like American productions. Do you just, you know, we won't spend too much time on this because I don't think it's that much of an issue personally, but it always does cause a lot of anxiety when American script supervisors are faced with the UK slating system, you know, and you know both very well, I'm sure. Do you have any thoughts about one or the other?
No, to be honest, I think I'm edging more towards American because that's how I learn, and I quite like.
Why is that?
Because the first assisting job was 24, so that was an American.
Oh, right.
That's why. And I quite like using the phonetic alphabet. But the English one is like 10 times simpler, but I think it's harder to be able to find stuff. Say if you have to shoot like a pickup of something like 2 months down the line and things like that, unless you have your marked up script or your notes handy, yours makes much more sense because your slate system is literally to do with the scene that you are shooting, whereas we just start the day, or the day one, start it with slate 1 and just go up slowly. I mean, what do you guys think, Sarah and Jane?
No, I agree. I was on the second unit on something called Tom and Jerry last summer, and that was American system, and it does make perfect sense to me to have it relating to the scene. It gets a bit taxing, I hope, when you sort of go around the alphabet twice, but other than that, it worked perfectly well, I thought. So I'm happy either way.
Yeah, same here. It just makes it slightly harder adding up the number of setups at the end of the day for the progress report, because when you're using our system, it's a very simple sum.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. There's like good things about both systems.
Can I ask, Sharon, have you guys ever like, do you guys do productions where you actually use the English slating system, or is that very, very rare?
It's very rare here. And there's been a couple of times that I've heard. One of them was I think Mary Cebulski, when she was doing Kind Rewind, like she sort of realized, it was a very sort of meta narrative. Maybe Mary's here on the call, I don't know. But so there was like some video movies within the movie, and she knew from working with the director before that it might get out of hand, and she might not know which video segment would be played back in another scene, so she decided to go with the European slating system and just start at one, and then, she found a way in her notes to, to attach it to certain scenes if she knew exactly where it was going to go, but, I've done both systems, and, it's, I agree, I love knowing where this shot goes because it's attached, but also like what's great about the British system is that it's the simplicity of it, so that everything between 221 and 253 was shot on this day in this location, so if you ever want to find it, exactly where to find it, but then it can cause confusion either way. Sometimes we get like really outrageous slates, we get sort of like X-ray Victor 43 pickup, or like take one, so I know a lot of sort of British crews, make a lot of fun about that.
I mean, the job I'm doing it, we were on slate 2000 and something, 2030 something, and and that gets really long to say as well.
Yeah. Another big difference between the UK and the US is your shooting day. So it may be different now, I don't know, but I was always led to believe that a normal shooting day in the UK is 10 hours, whereas in the US, a normal day for us is 12. Is that still true?
Yeah, it's 10 hours on camera, so it's the 8 till 7 is the sort of standard day.
Wow.
It's 10 plus 1 because of the hour for lunch, but they've also started now with continuous days and semi-continuous days and all sorts of nonsense that goes
Can you just explain what those are? Because we might call them something different, or it might be something different to what
continuous day means no lunch break. So you just work on through. Semi-continuous, never quite grasped that entirely. It's an extra half hour. I think it's 9 hours as opposed to 9.5 hours.
Mm-hmm.
I think.
So on a continuous day, would you be working a 10-hour day without breaking for lunch?
Yes.
Okay, so I think that's what we would call French hours over here, although the French claim that they would never do that.
They would never do that. And they want wine on the table for lunch. I'm all for the French system.
So on a normal day,
when you 9 hours.
Say again?
The continuous day would actually be 9 hours, wouldn't it? 8 till 5 would be a standard.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So on a normal shooting day, which is 10 hours, and there's 1 hour for lunch, is that hour on the clock or off the clock?
It's the clock.
It's on the clock.
Oh, off the clock, no. No, you have a full hour for lunch.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then you start again.
But then it's also assumed that certain departments, script supervisors included, who have to do sort of extra work outside of the shooting hours, that's just something that you absorb, right? That's so if you're shooting for 10 hours, it's naturally assumed that you're going to work another hour afterward, but there is no extra compensation for that. Is that true?
Yeah, nowadays they normally put that in the deal. At one time there was nothing put in the deal, and you had to try and negotiate any overtime that you worked. You just didn't get overtime. It was really hard to get it paid. But now they say an hour's, some productions say 90 minutes. I won't ever agree to that, but they say an hour is included in your deal. Anything above that, you'll get overtime. But I mean, I don't know about the others. I always work through my lunch just because it means I have less to do at the end of the day. You never get paid for it. We would never get paid for working through lunch.
Mm. Yeah, I'm with you. I do the same. I'll just work as hard as I can to get more evening in throughout the day.
Yeah. Television, now that is something that I feel is quite different, the way it works here versus the way it works over there. Again, this may be different, so I'd love to sort of hear how it works. But in general, UK TV shows, they don't have showrunners, and they don't have this system of the writers' room we do in the US. And if so, like what is the hierarchy and structure in that case? You know, like who has the ultimate creative responsibility and continuity of tone, especially when you have a television show where the director keeps changing? You know, how would that work on a British show?
We have script editors, particularly in television, and they have the sort of story arc and so on, and you liaise with them.
Are they a person that's on set, or
sorry?
Are they?
No, very rarely. And in my experience, they sometimes can fall victim to cut and paste, which means you then have to say, well, I don't think that's going to work in a tactful way. But showrunners, no. Anyway, somebody back me up there. We don't have.
It's rare, but it's becoming more common, I think. I think, Connie, you'd probably agree with that, wouldn't you? That there's more and more showrunners because Netflix and Amazon, etc., and Apple are making shows over here, so it is becoming more the norm.
Yeah, but it's with Netflix and Amazon and so on. But the British production companies and television companies aren't adopting that system.
No, they're not. No.
In the more English productions that I have done, where there's no showrunners and the writers tend to kind of write it and then just kind of take a step back, in my experience. But with those more English ones, I've been lucky enough that I've had a producer kind of try to be on set as much as possible, and they're the person that I can usually turn to for those like long running issues or the things that you would usually turn to a showrunner or a writer to. That's why I was really surprised when I first did my first big American one, because I was like, I can't believe the writer's with us all the time. It's just like, couldn't believe it. But I think it's good because they get a little bit of control as well.
Yeah, I mean, I get the impression that producers there take on more of a sort of creative role, you know, whereas here, you know, like because of the showrunner system and the writer's room, you know, even if the showrunner is not with you on set, they usually aren't, because they have a whole show to run, and there's, you know, a bunch of episodes coming up, and you know, they're still writing, the writer's room is still working hard, you know, but we've kind of sort of gotten used to having you know, obviously it depends on the director, but you know, but there usually is a writer figure that is fairly close, you know, and if the director has been relying on that person a lot, you know, for tone, then, you know, then as a script supervisor, you kind of sort of get used to sort of like the three of us being at the director's monitor, you know, so that is like something that has definitely sort of become more common over here. What about sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say that I think something that I found here as well is that quite often when they see dailies the next morning, the executive producers will be on the phone straight away saying that they're not happy with the tone or whatever. So you will have maybe to do some reshoots because of it, which is not a very efficient way of doing things. So I think that's another reason why we're heading more down the showrunner route. And I think it is becoming more common.
Yeah,
How
because with the showrunner system, you know, there is this kind of sort of hierarchy. There's a, you know, there's usually like a sort of co-executive producer, you know, who's sort of like creative. You know, there's like consultant producers, the story editors. You know, there's a whole sort of like system of things. And I think like if all of those people were just what you have, which is the equivalent of like the script editor, which is somebody who is not on set, then it does seem like there's a bit of a gap. Creatively, you know, but I also do feel that directors in England have a bit more freedom probably than the directors in the US, you know, because obviously with that kind of system, you know, you have to be more accountable, you know, to the creator and therefore more accountable to the studio ultimately.
Yeah, I think that's definitely right. Directors have got a lot more freedom, because a lot of the directors I work with have worked in both, and I'm much happier over here.
Yeah, so it doesn't sound like you have script coordinators over there. Like a script coordinator for us is somebody that we often liaise with a lot, you know, who does all the script managing, all the housekeeping of the script, you know, is in charge of coordinating all the revisions, and also, you know, the sort of name stamping and the security that goes with distributing that to sort of various people. I mean, I've worked with some script coordinators who, you know, particularly if it's a project where the timeline and chronology is complicated, that might all actually be broken out by the writer's room before I've even sort of come on board, you know, so they will actually sort of put it not only in the log line, but they might actually do like a sort of front sheet with a whole sort of day breakdown on there. There's also been situations where I've seen revision histories, if a script has gone through a lot of revisions, where they'll sort of, you know, have a sort of breakdown of all the different colors that a script has changed and all the pages that have turned. And then some shows, I know they did this on Elementary, which they had a lot of like difficult like medical jargon, you know, they would actually do a sheet of phonetic pronunciation, you know, so there's, you know, there's a lot of sort of tasks that a script coordinator does for us over here. Who would do that in the UK if they were to do that?
That would be the script editor.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they wouldn't do the stamping of the scripts, the name stamping. That would come from the office when they issued from the production office. But the script editor would do the script management.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to ask you about something that is completely unfamiliar to us over here, which is when you're hired for a job, like you have this thing called script supervisors have agents. Script supervisors have a diary service. So could anyone just explain like how that works? Because that is something that totally does not exist over here.
I don't think any of us have we? Oh, Connie has.
Yeah, I've had both. I had an agent for a few years, and now I'm on a diary service. It was quite new to me as well, but it's kind of like if you've ever dealt with like actors agencies and stuff. They look for work for you, and they discuss your rates, and they tell you about, they try to put your name out for upcoming roles, but then they do your invoicing as well, which was really handy. But they do take 10%. For my agency, they took 10% of everything that I earn, and they send me over, which is kind of why I left, because I thought they weren't actually getting me too much, and they were also taking 10%, which over time does really add up. And now I'm with the diary service, who is like a set rate per month, but they don't do your invoicing, they don't discuss your rates, they just have you on their books, and then productions can go to them and say, oh, we need a script supervisor, do you have any, or something, and then they send the CV. Sarah, what have you heard?
No, much the same as you. know, I've never bothered with an agent, but certainly a diary service for a long time. But they started originally before people had mobile phones. So it was somewhere where a production company could ring up and say, you know, I need somebody for tomorrow, whatever, who's available. The first ones are call box and bookends. I'm talking you way back when you'd send a lonely production runner off to a telephone box to ring up your diary service, and they'd get a list of who was working the next day and so on. Anyway, mobile phones changed all that. But as Connie says, the advantage of a diary service is that somebody might ring up for a particular person who's not available, and then you can pick up work by default in those terms. But how do you all get work in that case if you don't have, if you don't have that system? Is there no agents at all, or?
No, we don't have that. It's really to do with there really is no system. It's kind of I guess it's mostly to do with connections, the people you've worked with before, word of mouth, and when you work in a production hub like Atlanta or New York, where there's usually sort of shows constantly sort of like shooting, productions will find that once this show has ended, and then their show is about to start, they just know that this entire crew is now available, so you kind of get a sense of the waves of availability, which is sort of based on the waves of production, which is based, of course, on pilots and seasonal things like that. And then, our union 161, like we have a sort of availability roster. Like they wouldn't sort of book us for a job, but we could sort of we could mark ourselves as available on that. So a producer could go and access that roster, and then based on resumes, CVs, they could sort of decide, they could shortlist who they would want to sort of call. Obviously a lot of it is based on availability, and as I'm sure it's the same over there, like, they do tend to sort of judge you by what you last worked on, so they usually sort of, look at the credits, or go straight to IMDb, so yeah, the concept of like a diary service to sort of to book you, like that's very sort of foreign to us. And also the concept of agencies, which actually sort of like brings me to like another sort of question, because like Beckham is, the union, the film union in the UK, but from what you've said, like maybe it used to be different, but now you don't actually have to be in Beckham to sort of work on production, so could you talk a little bit about that, and what does Beckham do for its members in that case?
Well, Margaret Thatcher took all the power away from the unions because there was no secondary picketing. It used to be that if people didn't like what was going on, and again, this was filmed before digital, that the labs wouldn't release the film if there was a problem with the union, and it was very strong, and it was a closed shop. And that's all changed, and now I'm interested to hear that producers would go to unions, because I think in Britain they would positively avoid them. Though, in fact, COVID has seen a tremendous surge in people joining, and Beckham has been superb in the support.
Why do you think that is? Is that because they have like, I've looked at their document, which I think is like over 100 pages long, yeah, which is their guidelines. Is that because they are very on top of like making sure that everything is going to be done right?
They steam straight in, but their powers are limited. By law, they cannot demand that we all go on strike, etc., etc. So they had a lot of their power taken away from them. But the benefits are, if there's a legal dispute, they will certainly support you. They will fight for better pay and conditions, but they're only as strong as their membership. Jane, I think you know as much as I do about it. Do you not?
Yeah, I completely agree. And it's a really hard situation now, and it was much easier when we did all have to be part of a union, because I think it was easier for people to be to negotiate rates, and now there's a lot of undercutting goes on. There's although there is supposed to be a set rate, it's not always adhered to, and people will undercut, which certainly in union days didn't happen.
Mm-hmm. I guess that's why it makes sense for some people to use an agency that does all that negotiating for you, I guess.
The other thing we have that perhaps you don't is, have you ever heard of the knowledge or Ks?
Which is like a sort of directory of all the crew.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess we have something like that, but I think it might be by state. You know, I think New York production has a sort of a list of all the people on that. Do you find that's like a sort of very useful system to have?
Well, production certainly use it. I think every production has a copy of the knowledge, which was established initially by a production coordinator. Of course, everybody used to have a black filofax with, and you just collect names and telephone numbers obsessively. This was before GDPR anyway, when you know, anybody would give you their number. And this production coordinator simply published her black book, which was as fat as can be, and it now lists advertising agencies, prop houses, every member of crew you can think of, stunt vehicles.
Oh, Linda's showing us.
Linda's showing it, yeah, I can see that.
Oh, okay.
Thank you, Linda.
It's basically a Bible for every production. If you want to, you know, you can find anything you want virtually if you open up the knowledge. Likewise, Ks, in order to crew up. So if you haven't got one of those, then suddenly you make a fortune, because the one who started it has long retired, and very nicely, thank you.
Okay, well, you know, it's like 2:40, so I just wanted to, you know, save some time for questions if anyone has questions. Jermaine, can we open up for questions?
Sure.
If anybody wants to find out more about how things work in the UK, or how assistants and trainees work.
There's a question in the chat about making a deal. Is it for a weekly amount or not an hourly one? And that again, that's all a question of negotiation, but mostly production will try and say, in my experience, well, this is your weekly rate, but it will be based on a 10 or 11-hour day. And you get a memo deal before you start working. Having negotiated everything you have discussed is in a memo deal. This is a fairly recent thing, whereby it's written down what we have discussed, what we have agreed, and what the overtime rate will be in box money. I don't know if you do that as well.
Yeah.
This is Deirdre Horgan. I did write that because I asked. So when you flat out, each of you would go in to negotiate something different. I mean, like, we know it's our hourly, you know, we know we have to negotiate our camera bump separately. We negotiate our kit rental separately, but you guys even have to do a different hourly kind of rate, which what I guess I meant was, and that's a flat rate for X amount of hours, your, you know, 10 hours. And then you also, like we do, you would put on your kit and your camera, and any, if you go overtime, what that might be, correct?
Well, I think camera bump we don't get. We don't get camera bump. I've certainly never have.
Have you never had? If you get an additional camera, I mean, I know some script supervisors have and fight for it. It's not completely unknown, but it's not standard.
We're standard. In our contract, it's 40, even if you have 125 cameras, but everybody goes in and negotiates separately, you know, one, you know, a second camera, X amount. If you put 3 cameras, you know, if you have an action movie and you know that you're going to be doing the stunt unit action, and you know you're going to have that a script supervisor had 15 on the ground and 5 up, you know, from the rooftops, you definitely go in and you make another deal for all those cameras.
I'm sure we'd give it a go too.
Yeah, I would too.
So, but do you all try to stay around the same, you know, like, you know, £2,500 for the week, including ever? I mean, do you all try the same? Or you mentioned, Jane, there's a lot of undercutting.
I don't know if there's a lot of undercutting. I know that Bec2 have their rates that they publish, which are should be the minimum rates, and it's per sort of per budget. So a lower budget thing is a lower rate than you know, a major feature film. And we're also, another thing that Beckham have had is we're supposed to have parity with the first day scene, which, but again, I've found when I've said that to line producers, they're like, oh, I've never heard that before. They always play dumb. So it's not as cut and dried as I think your negotiating is. Would you agree, Sarah?
Yeah, and I think we should be on parity with operators anyway.
I agree. I absolutely agree. We should be operators. Yeah. And how much less does an assistant script supervisor get, ladies? Is it a big jump from the script supervisor to the assistant?
Go on, Sarah. Sarah, go on.
No, you're more knowledgeable than me, but all I'm saying, there are, as Jane said, there are minimum rates in Bec2. So you can always quote those, but I think everybody tries to get more than the minimum. But Madz is a better person to speak than I am about it.
Yeah, because I guess I'm slightly more experienced as an assistant. I feel in a very strong position. I always negotiate a higher rate. I've had producers always be like, you're so bold to be asking for a higher rate. But it's because I say to them, you know, I can be there if you need splinter unit or second unit. I'm saving you a lot of time and work. So I think I always go on that. And also I think it's always good to ask for more than for less. I've got a lot of friends who work in camera and lighting, and they're so great with just asking, knowing what they're worth and asking for it. So I just take inspiration from them, and I always ask for more.
Good for you.
Yeah, good for you. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think like one thing I've noticed is that because you know, when I sort of like researched this and like looked at the Bec2 rates, and I sort of realized that, you know, from what I've heard, you know, like even though Bec2 recommends these rates, like, you know, not production companies kind of ignore them most of the time, or they say, oh, we're going to use, you know, like what PACT says, you know, instead of Bec2 or whatever, or they quote some different body or organization, you know, but you know, but I mean, there's sort of like, you know, there's good and bad, because, you know, as Madz just said, like, you know, she's able to negotiate a better rate based on her experience. And I do kind of sort of get the sense that seniority and experience does mean something over there, you know, whereas here, you know, I mean, we're lucky that we have a union, you know, so the rates are, you know, they're in the contract, you know, so, you know, someone who has 5 years experience will get the same rate as someone who has 20 years experience, but that rate will be a decent rate, you know, and but of course there are other things we have to sort of like fight for, you know. So I was sort of, when I was asking about Bec2 in the union, I was sort of curious, you know, how much of a, you know, if the union doesn't have that sort of bargaining power to sort of help you with your rates, like it, I can imagine it must be a struggle to sort of maintain solidarity and negotiate as a whole for better conditions and rates, you know. So
I found that it's easier to negotiate if it's a director that you've worked with a lot, or a director that particularly wants you, because the production know that, and know that they're going to have to in the end pay what you want, really. And I had a situation actually on Fleabag where I was going to walk away because they weren't paying me enough. They just, you know, they would say it's comedy, it's not drama. They wouldn't pay me enough, and the director stepped in, and all of a sudden they had.
It's not a thing where like they will pay less for comedy.
Well, not really, no, but they'll try anything on.
Yeah, it's very wearying, but that was one of the reasons, actually, the Script Supervisors Association. Originally, there was a Yahoo group, which was set up by somebody called Anne Bull, and all credit to her.
I was a member of that way back.
Oh, okay. Well, that was brilliant. It went a bit rogue in the end, because there were so many people who weren't necessarily script supervisors. But the Script Supervisors Association then grew out of that. And one of the main things is that we're there as a support group. So you can actually get chucked out if you undercut, because you're there. And we did have a lot of good successes. Again, in Anwen's day, there was one television program And they had to ring around about 40 people or something before they could get somebody who hadn't heard and who wasn't in the group. And we held the line until this one person, who we then sought out and said, you better join. So,
that's great, you know. So that's great to hear that solidarity does mean something, you know, if you all stick together.
That's the plan. You know, obviously people have family commitments, mortgages, etc., etc. Nobody's going to sort of be completely brutal to them, but it is a great. And obviously, if you stick together, eventually, they're going to have to. Production's going to have to pay. It makes sense. But anyway, that's the theory.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And just because, you know, it's the topic on everyone's mind right now, and like the UK is obviously in a much better position right now than we are in the US in general. There may be certain exceptions, but you know, Rachel, you did talk a little bit about it, you know, like what, you know, how is the UK adapting, you know, to the post-COVID world and getting the industry back to work, and what does that seem like it's going to look like from your side of things?
Just got a load of emails through actually about protocol for tomorrow morning. So you've got to complete a questionnaire before you even go in to give you a pass to get onto site, and then they'll give you another pass, and then they'll take your temperature, and then you'll be let in, and then we've all got training to do tomorrow, and I guess we've got different zones, so whoever's allowed to be on set has one colour pass, and then the zones go out like that. Catering, I don't think we're going to get fed this week.
Possibly in your stays.
I don't know. That's weird, but I think from next week, it's all going to be new territory. I don't know. It's just not going to be the same as it was before. So.
What about testing, Rachel? Has anybody been tested?
Well, my partner actually started on sex education this week, and yeah, they got tested first day, and I think it's a daily thing.
Are you going to be tested?
I believe so. Yeah, we will have to go through, testing and tests.
Any idea of how frequent?
I think it might. Well, we've got to do. It says in this email we've got to do the questionnaire daily, so it's like a health questionnaire.
Yeah, and we. Yeah, I was just going to add to that I think we get tested twice a week.
Twice a week, yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting, because my job, we're not going to be tested. Only the cast will be tested. Which
really?
Bizarre.
On other jobs that I know, they're in Pinewood Studios and they're being tested every single day, every single morning. So it's also wildly different. I think it massively depends.
Yeah, so it sounds very similar to over here, because there's just, you know, it's just very inconsistent depending on the job and the budget. And
yeah. With this job, we get given like face masks and sanitizer, but I've heard other jobs telling crew to bring their own masks in and their own and things like that.
But I find it interesting that, you know, even though the general sense is to have less people on set, that, you know, no one said anything about not having the assistant script supervisor, not having the trainee script supervisor. Is that something that you were concerned about?
Madz had a call the other day, and I think, we're going to be separate from being on set. It's only Karen who's on set.
And our roles were also pre-budgeted, because the production actually started in, was it March or February?
Yeah.
So it was already budgeted for, our pay was already pre-budgeted. So I think if it was a new thing to bring us on, it might be a different thing, but Rachel's role's been covered by a scheme, I think. So
yeah.
And then my role was negotiated earlier.
But I do know that certain people have been let go on other jobs, trainees, not in scripts, and the funding for screen skills, I think it's stopped now. I think it's one of the last ones to go on it. It's very lucky.
And then do you imagine you're going to be doing your job remotely just by having seeing the camera view onto set from your computer? Is that the way it's going to be set up?
I guess. I think we might have a monitor or Q take. I think.
We're meant to have access to visuals and sound, but I think the hardest thing will be communicating with Karen.
Yeah. Yeah, we have had situations of that over here, but it hasn't been a long job. It sounds like what you're going back to is a long job, so
yeah, it's all the way till February, I think. So.
Yeah, they better have it all worked out. Does anybody have any other questions? I think we've covered quite a lot of ground here. Anybody can pipe up.
I see on the chat that Alex A has a question.
Alex A.
I mean, not on the participants. Alex A has his hand up. So Alex, you can unmute yourself if you want and ask your question.
I guess I didn't think I had my hand up, but hello, everybody.
Alex A, not Alex Hill, but if you have a question.
No, I don't. Well, okay, yeah, Alex A is saying no question. I guess now that I've been called on, I'd be curious to know what are the Bec2 minimums, and do they have different scales depending on the budgets like we have over here?
I can send you that, Alex. Alex is actually the chair of the Script Supervisor committee, so he's all over this kind of stuff, But one thing I did notice when I looked at it was that like as Deirdre was asking before, because that's another big difference. Because like in the US, like our hourly rate is worked out to the 4th decimal point. It's very specific. And, when we get paid, like we get tracked every 10th of an hour, so every 6 minutes is another click on that dial, so we, whatever time we wrap out at, that's we get paid until that minute, So what I did notice when I was kind of looking at the Bec2 site was that, they may talk about the hourly rate, but they generally, when they negotiate, they sort of negotiate this flat weekly rate, and they tend to sort of round it off, so even if the hourly rate was, like, I don't know, like £42 or whatever it was, and then it sort of came out as, I don't know, like 1918, they would just round it down to 1900, which, in America, like, like we would not put up for that.
That adds up.
It's very much a guide anyway. The Bec2 rates card, it is a guide.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
For me though, that you guys do it hourly. I mean, I don't know about you, Sarah and Jane, but I've always done mine on a daily rate, on the basis of a certain shoot time. So hourly is very to the point. But then I guess you have that union that you all they all have to stick by. So we can learn something from you.
Well, we're not as regulated in the hours we work, unfortunately, are we? So which is a pity. We used to be. I mean, I can remember the days when we got paid by the hour. And when I started, we got paid by the hour. It was a basic 37.5-hour week. So you can imagine how much overtime we earned.
And you had a no lunch break and a no supper break.
Yeah, and you got three tea for a bank holiday weekend, 2.5 tea for we did get paid very well in those days. But
days.
Mrs. Thatcher said farewell to that for us.
Yeah.
Melanie, did you have a question? Your hand was up before.
Yes, thank you. I've been wondering, is there a fixed amount of prep time that you get for, our episodic versus film, or which we do? I mean, we have, there's a kind of rule of thumb in LA. It's very explicit. In New York, it's a little bit what you negotiate. But does that exist for you? Prep time?
I've never found it existing. It's not a sort of set amount. I've always negotiated it. Do the rest of you agree?
Yes. You have to fight. Sometimes they say, oh, well, we've allowed you this. And you say, but well, hold on a minute. So, but it's never less than a week. You try for 2. On a film, it can be anything between 4 and 6 weeks, depending on the size of the film. So it's always negotiable when the job comes in.
We get 27 and a half hours in Los Angeles, and that's more than New York.
And how long is that for? 1 hour?
1 hour episodic, yeah.
Right, okay.
So even between, you know, Los Angeles is covered by local 871, you know, so that's 2 different unions working on 2 different contracts, you know, so even though we do the same job, you know, there's actually quite, you know, a lot of differences. There's differences in rate, in prep language, in a lot of things, you know, so yeah, it's even within the same contract sometimes, you know, we all know about those issues over here. Nancy.
I always try and get a week per episode, a week per hour episode. Doesn't always work, but that's what I would try for. But that would, you see, we don't get extra days for the read through and for the production meeting. That would be included in that prep.
Right,
so
because once again, it's this like flat weekly thing where it's just like, here's a week, you know.
That's included in for us going to the production meeting, going to the crew. In New York, timing a script is included in our prep time and is not negotiated separately. It is negotiated separately in LA.
Right. I mean, sometimes we'll negotiate separately for timing because they'll want a pre-timing, you know, weeks before we come on board. They'll want a time, so we will negotiate for that. But then quite often they'll say, oh, well, if we pay you 2 days to time the scripts, will you take it out of your prep? I always say no.
Yeah.
And they normally have to go along with it. But I bet you do too, Sarah, don't you?
Yeah, certainly do. Apart from anything else, the scripts probably changed after that first time anyway.
Yeah.
Nancy, you have a question?
Yes, I do. I have 2 questions. Thank you, ladies, first of all, for visiting with us. One is, I've noticed that you guys are all ladies. Do y'all have an input of guys, men, joining y'all as script supervisors on y'all's side?
Yeah, now. We didn't used to, but we do now. Sarah, do you know how many men are doing the job now?
No, maybe 5 or 10. I don't know. But it's not a vast amount. It's been traditionally viewed as a female job for no good reason. Mm-hmm. And my personal view is that's one of the reasons why the rates are, you know, they try and keep the rates low. That's why we're not on parity with operators.
Exactly.
They see it as a secretarial job, which it absolutely isn't.
Okay. And my second question, I overheard a couple of you say overtime. So is your overtime rate a negotiable rate after your daily or weekly rate that y'all have? How do you work with your overtime?
Generally, in my experience, the production says the overtime rate will be paid at £35 an hour. It seems to be their favourite, and that's across the board for all the crew.
So you negotiate a weekly rate or a daily rate, and then you tabulate your overtime hours, and then you just put those in at the end of the week?
You put in your hours, but in my experience, which is more television than film, no, it happens in film as well, that you will negotiate your rate, and then they will say the overtime rate that we will pay is so much.
Okay, interesting.
Do you agree, Sharon? Sorry, Sharon. Jane?
Yes, yeah. I mean, it's not. It tends to be. I think it's £45 an hour at the moment. The sort of norm. Yeah, I always find as well when you put your hours in at the end of the week, they always try and argue as well. And why did you do this? And,
yeah.
You know, we have to. If we know that we've got a lot of notes to do one night, we have to sort of ask permission to do it in advance, which is ridiculous because you can't always know how long it's going to take you, and that drives me insane. That's one of the things I really, really hate. And I just think I've been doing this job a very long time. Don't question me. I'm not going to. I don't want to be working at night. I can assure you.
Yeah.
Here, here.
Thank you.
Linda.
I just wanted to put in about male script supervisors. Historically, there was one guy in New York, Nick Cigaro, and he started in around 58, and he was a script supervisor in New York until then he became a director. And there, in one of the script supervisor books about LA, one of the studios, and I think it was MGM, only had male script supervisors for a while. But that's about all that's the information I know about male script supervisors, LA and here. Okay, that's all I had. But thank you this was very interesting. The last thing about that book, that was a New York production guide, and it was really old. I haven't had a new one in 15 years.
Alex, did you have a final question?
Yeah, I was just going to add to what Linda was saying. My understanding from talking to retired script supervisors in Los Angeles was that it was also two separate positions. I think as far back as maybe the 50s, there was a continuity supervisor who was almost always male, and that was usually viewed as the stepping stone to a director. And then you had a script supervisor or a script girl doing a separate job, but they were two different positions, and they were later merged. I think sometime in the 50s is what I had heard. But I just thought I'd mention that. But it seemed like in Britain it was two separate jobs as well.
Yeah, in LA, that book was the Carol Sevilla, what was it, Shirley Ulmer and Carol Sevilla. There was a section that talked about the male script supervisor, but they didn't say it was different. And this was like from the 40s too.
Yeah. We were all known as continuity girls until the tax office wanted to make us all pay as you earn, as opposed to Schedule D, which is the freelance rate when you do your own taxes and you claim for it. And there was a doyenne of script supervisors, a name to conjure with, and she took on the tax office and treated them just the way she would have done as a cheeky clapper-loader, and emerged triumphant. We were script supervisors, head of department, and remained Schedule D. And then from that point on, well, nobody would ever say continuity girl anymore, anyway. But that's our history of how it changed.
Thank you for that. I didn't know that. I didn't know that about the male script supervisors either. So it's past 3. We've talked, pretty much nonstop for 2 hours. And I just want to thank all our panelists for giving their time. I know it's like dinner time now, or past dinner time for you over there. But thank you so much for being so generous with your time and sharing your knowledge. And for me, it was just very interesting, because I grew up in England, but my whole career has been in New York, so of course I've always been curious about what would things have been like if I hadn't have come here. Thank you for talking about assistant script supervisors too, because that's been something that we've been talking a lot about too, especially since we're all not working. We've had a lot of time to talk about all the work that we do without any help, so it might be a difficult concept for us to sort of introduce here, because it's a complicated issue, because it's obviously sort of contractual too. But it's given us some ideas of how things work in a different system, how they can work and how they can work well, so thank you so much for that, everyone.
Yes, thank you very, very much, everybody. Yes, wonderful.
That was so great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been very.
Thank you all for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you for
Bye-bye.
having us.
Maybe we should extend the invitation to our colleagues from UK if they want to attend our seminars.
Well, I
I'd
think
love
this, I think
to.